sounds really fun. Go for the ride. Our next speaker is Carolyn Blossel, and this is project number 2 in the Professional Speaker's Manual. This speech is the Speaking to Entertain. The title is Iowa, and it's 15 to 20 minutes. Let's welcome Carolyn.
That's a good question. I don't know. When does he turn it to yellow if it's 15 to 20?
15 to 20.
So like at 17?
Yeah.
17.
Or 18.
Just turn it to green when it's 15, then
Okay.
I'll be wrapping up shortly after that.
It's a long day. I don't know. Once it goes red.
How many of you, when you think about where would I like to go on vacation with my family, look at that map of the United States and say, Iowa, let's all go to Iowa. Seriously? No one's raising their hand? Let me tell you, you are missing out. I tell people that you haven't lived until you've spent time in Iowa. Has anybody spent time in Iowa besides driving through the state? Not even an overnight in Iowa? Oh, an overnight in Iowa.
Yeah, I stayed
Des
in
Moines.
in a hotel.
There you go. Well, I grew up in Iowa, and I think it's a great place to spend time. I mean, after all, have you ever been to a hog farm? Did you know that there are more hogs in Iowa than anywhere else in the United States? You may be wondering what hogs really are. We don't call them pigs. They're hogs. I grew up where there was a high school right next to a hog farm. Now, you really didn't want to be at school on the day that the wind was blowing in the wrong direction. But boy, do those hogs produce something wonderful. Bacon, for example, pork chops and applesauce, definitely got to have that. Now, the other thing about Iowa you also may not know is they are some of the friendliest people you'll ever meet. Let me give you an example. I was going back home. We lived in Austria at the time, and I was going to go visit my mom and bring her her first grandson to visit. As is common of my mom, she was one of the first people always to meet me at the airport, just as I was getting off the plane. Back in those days when you could do that. I was so excited, waiting for her, seeing her in the crowd, and she was nowhere to be found. It turned out that she'd gotten stopped by the policeman on her way to the airport. She was so excited to meet me that she had gotten stopped for speeding. Well, the story doesn't end there. Did I tell you that Iowans are really friendly? Guess what we had to do on the way home from the airport? There was that policeman still in his hiding place to get any speeding motorists on the highway, and she had to, of course, stop and introduce me and her brand new grandson to that police officer. And of course, once we got to town, we had to go to the local grocery store, to the butcher shop, of course, where all of that beautiful hog pork was, to introduce me and my son to the butcher at the butcher shop. Now, how many of you have had that experience as you've gone to visit your family for the first time, had to be introduced to the police officer, to the butcher at the local butcher shop? But that's Iowa friendliness for you. Now, some people may think that Iowa is flat. Have you ever ridden your bike across Iowa? None of you? It is not flat. And if you doubt me on that, there's the RAGBRAI race every summer in Iowa. RAGBRAI stands for Register's Annual Great Bike Ride Across Iowa. Now, if you're a bike rider, let's see, we don't have Steve here today. That's something he should put on his list of things to do. You see, when you ride across Iowa, you meet all sorts of folk. You start on the west coast at the Missouri River, and you ride all the way across Iowa through all those wonderful little towns all the way to the Mississippi River. And you ride 50 to 70 miles a day, and it is not flat terrain. But every night at that camping place in those small towns, it is like a county carnival happening. And everyone has baked a pie for this special occasion. In this case, no need for Nutri-Bars or your protein bars. There's pie at every corner. And I know this because they stopped through Indianola one summer, and my mom spent weeks baking pies, filling her freezer full of pies for that RAGBRAI race. One of the summers that we went back to Iowa, we would load our kids in the car, drive back to Iowa, and I don't know if you've ever driven back that way, but you go through Wyoming, then it's Nebraska, and then you hit Iowa. We hadn't been far into Iowa before one of my sons exclaimed, and he's a very bright son, he said, "Mom, there are cornfields everywhere." To which I exclaimed, "Of course, we are in Iowa. There's corn growing everywhere." In fact, it's the #1 corn producing state in our nation. Corn syrup, corn meal, corn flour, and of course ethanol. Now that's kind of up for discussion of whether that's good or not for the economy, for your gas mileage. But Iowans are very proud of their corn. In this case, corn is not only one of the staples of Iowa, but that's why you'd want to go to Iowa to take a vacation. You can watch the corn grow. And you don't think that's exciting? Why, there's just as many soybeans to be had in Iowa as well. And if the corn isn't growing at knee-high by the 4th, which means, of course, that it's going to be a great year for the farmers, then there are the soybeans everywhere. Now, you may wonder, why on earth would that be anything of great excitement, watching the corn grow, the hogs, and the soybeans? Well, that's Iowa for you. Then I met my husband. Well, he's from California. I don't know if you've ever been to California. Anyone taking a vacation? See, everyone's taking vacations to California. It was just a few years ago that we decided as a family to take a vacation to California. The beach, the sand, Disneyland. My kids looked at me and they said, "Mom, why didn't we ever take a vacation like this? We always headed east to Iowa. And instead we could have headed west to the beach." You see, you don't know my children. The easiest kind of vacation is to put them all in a car, the doors are locked, you know where they all are, and you can arrive at your destination all together in one place. Isn't that brilliant? Driving 20 hours all the way to Iowa all in one car? Now what could be more fun than that? Especially if you bring a giant can of Jelly Bellies on the trip. You see, that can entertain, you may not know this, but Jelly Bellies can entertain your kids for hours because you can combine all sorts, spend hours combining the pink grapefruit with the vanilla or deciding if root beer combined with a popcorn flavor is the best combination ever. But then, of course, you arrive in Iowa and those Jelly Bellies are stuck everywhere on you. So this trip to California opened my kids' eyes to there was life besides Iowa. But I say wherever you've grown up, it has its own special kind of beauty. For example, Iowa in the wintertime, I don't know if you know this, because I've noticed in Utah, snow falls straight down, unless maybe you're in Highland or Alpine and there's wind. But in Iowa, there are always prairie winds. So my kids would ask me, "So Mom, how much snow did you have growing up in the wintertime?" And all I could think about were those giant snowdrifts that were clear up to our rooftops, because snow never just felt like this. I remember also going to school in those snowdrifts. I lived in the day when we did not have hot lunch, and you had to walk to school, back home for lunch, walk back to school, and come back home again. And really, it was only on a dare in the wintertime, so you really wanted to do that. So I'd make up all sorts of stories about why I needed to stay at school for lunch, because in those days, only the kids that lived out in the country and got bused into school were the ones that got to stay at school. And in this case, we had those lunch boxes with the thermoses inside where you'd have the hot soup, and then my mom would make usually a ham salad sandwich, of course. Why? Hogs, of course. He had the ham salad sandwiches and the tomato soup in the thermos. because I just did not want to wrap myself up in my scarf and my winter coat and the gloves and the snow, 2 pairs of pants to make that trek home in the wintertime. Now, the other thing about Iowa that you don't experience in many other places are fireflies. See, we don't have fireflies here. I don't know if they have fireflies in California, but fireflies are actually something that's quite exciting if you've never experienced it. And you get to chase those things and collect those things all summer long, and they're glowing everywhere. There was one summer in particular that I remember. We were going to visit my family, and it was right when Harry Potter was coming out. My kids also are highly allergic, some of them to dogs, which my mom had dogs. Some are allergic to cats, my mom had cats, and other things that were in this house. So we created the perfect vacation scenario. Not only the drive to Iowa where the kids were contained in the car, but we were going to be camping out in the backyard with a giant tent for all the kids. We'd had the electricity brought in, so they had a fan, they had the lights, and they had the latest Harry Potter book. Nothing could go wrong. The weather was perfect. The kids were in the bed. They had everything they needed. And then in the middle of the night, have you ever experienced a Midwestern thunderstorm? It is thunder that you feel like the earth is truly going to open up and swallow someone inside, and the lightning is so intense that the entire sky is filled with light. That is what happened this night. Of course, my mom comes in and she says, because I'm sleeping inside, not in the tent with the kids, and she said, so how long before the kids are going to be inside? And I'm thinking, let's see, we have, I think it was 8 kids out there, maybe 7 at that time, out in the tent. My mom has a 3-bedroom house with 2 beds, one in the master bedroom and then one futon that I was sleeping on and maybe one other bed for all of us to be in this house together. And sure enough, it wasn't long before the torrential rains came and the kids were all filing in the house as fast as they could go. Still to this day, that Harry Potter volume, I can't remember if it was 6 or 5, is twice the size because it was sopping wet from all that rain in the tent. You may wonder also about Iowans. Why would they want to stay there when the summers are so hot and muggy, the winters are so full of snow and ice? In fact, one time the ice storm was so bad that you could hear the limbs just breaking off from the trees. My aunt had to buy ice climbing boots to be able to even go out to her car, and this lasted for several days. So you've got the humidity of the summer, you have the windiness of the winter and the snow, and then you have the ice, and then you also have the best people on the planet. They are the friendliest sort of people. Let me give you an example. I went with my mom and my sister and our daughter last year to Scandinavia to do a roots experience, go to the place where my mom's grandmother had been raised and where her grandfather had been raised. It didn't matter where we were going. My mom was conversing with everyone along the way, even though she didn't speak Swedish and she didn't speak Danish and she didn't speak any Icelandic. But she was carrying on a conversation wherever she went with whomever she wanted to come in contact with. My sister just as well, asking for directions, asking. We even had to stop by a field of flowers to find out exactly what kind of flowers those were and ask someone locally, what is it that's growing in this field over here? That's just the way Iowans are. I also noticed that Iowans love to learn about anything. Well, what else do you have to do in the wintertime? You can't be farming and you can't be going out and planting a garden, but you can be learning. A few years into our marriage, my husband and I, we were at the dinner table eating what would you expect as an Iowan? What would be the corn? And my husband said to me, so what kind of seeds do you have to plant to get sweet corn? You see, he was born and raised in the Bay Area, and farming was not part of his heritage. Then he asked me, so if you want to have white kernels in your sweet corn versus yellow kernels in your sweet corn, so So do you put paper bags over the corn as it's growing to try to get the white kernels? I have to give you a context for that story. You see, we used to live in Austria, and they have a Spargelsaison, or asparagus season, in the springtime. And unlike our green asparagus that we have in our stores, their asparagus is white. And it's as white and fair as our skin. Well, those of us in this room. They cover it so it doesn't have photosynthesis. And so he thought that perhaps the same kind of procedure was part of growing corn. But as an Iowan, what do you do to grow sweet corn? Of course, you just plant a sweet corn seed. And if you want yellow corn, then you plant the yellow corn seeds. If you want the white sweet corn, you plant the white sweet corn seeds. Life as an Iowan is always interesting. And things that we take for granted, for example, in Utah, I thought I could just plant a garden just like I did in Iowa and how I grew up. You just put the shovel into the ground, pick up the soil, plant your seed, things will grow. The rain will just come naturally from the sky. Well, where I live, it's all rocks. I didn't know that that could be a thing. And not even all rocks, but where was the rain? It wasn't just coming down freely as it did in Iowa. So I've appreciated the dark, rich soil of Iowa, and you can plant anything and it grows. I'm grateful for my Iowa heritage. And if I had to raise my hand and say, should we go to Iowa? Guess what I'd say? Absolutely.